thinking in projects on this episode of Develop in Process. Thinking in projects is a topic that I've talked about previously on this show, and I think it's a topic that really deserves an episode of its own because it's just so integral and it's been so useful in my own work, and I've seen it do so much for other people. A lot of times when you look at photography on the internet especially, we live in this sort of photographic culture right now of greatest hits, where every individual image is designed to generate as many likes, as many shares, as many comments as possible on social media. And so that individual image is often hyped up and it's, pumped up, really powerful, bold, dynamic compositions of these famous locations and cranked up saturation and contrast and colors and fancy Photoshop techniques and stuff. And even with film photography, a lot of times the image itself, we just place a lot of emphasis on it, and then we get either really excited and elated when it works out or really discouraged when it doesn't, because we're hinging all this energy on this one photograph. And there's certainly nothing wrong with putting all that attention into one photograph. In fact, I do think that we should put that much attention on the creation side of the photograph, because we want each photograph to count. We want it to matter. We want it to have thought put into it and be deliberate and intentional and tell a story. But I think oftentimes we expect too much from a single image, when in reality, the image would be better served as a part of a collection or series of images, often referred to as a project. So why would we want to create in projects? Well, projects are a way of exploring ideas through photography and also telling stories. And as humans, we connect with these ideas and stories more powerfully than we do with a single photograph. For example, we want to get to know a place. We want to understand an idea. We want to feel like we know a person or have had an experience. And sometimes just looking at a single image isn't necessarily powerful enough to achieve that as effectively as looking at an entire cohesive body of work around that same idea. So I'm going to give you a handful of quick examples of photographers who have done project work that you can look at on your own and maybe get some ideas from. One of them is, of course, Nick Brandt, who I mentioned on previous episodes. He has created work in Africa around the loss of the big mammals in Africa due to poaching and unsustainable development. And then he's also explored the effects on the people there and how their lives have just been destroyed by a lot of this stuff that's been going on over there. And his motivation in creating that project was to drive change and action to kind of curb those things. And he actually is making a difference and has been able to save hundreds of animals and establish foundations and stuff like that over there through his photography. Joe Freeman is another photographer. He did a project exploring the deforestation of the Pacific Northwest due to poorly regulated logging in a lot of areas. And I've personally driven up there and seen just how atrocious it is. There's just vast stretches where they just basically mow the trees down as far as you can see. And oftentimes they'll just leave like 2 or 3 rows of trees on each side of the road to kind of deceive you that they haven't logged that area. And then as soon as you walk through the 3 trees, it's like just wasteland of just demolished forests. And so he's been exploring that idea, and how he did it was he basically would take sticks and lumber and try and build fake trees out in the woods using lumber, and just show that you can't rebuild a tree once you've cut it down. Of course, you can replant a tree, but you can't you can't restore an old growth forest, at least not in any sane amount of time. And so he's just kind of showing using a sort of comedic effect to illustrate an idea there. Nick Carver is another photographer who's done some really good work with projects, and his are oftentimes very simple and short projects, which I like because they're not so intimidating. So what Nick has done, for example, is he's gone out to Joshua Tree National Park and just took his Mamiya RZ67 and some portrait lenses and created images around the idea of Joshua trees. What if we photograph them as people, as portrait subjects, and kind of explored that idea. And so he created a bunch of images around that, and then he documented the whole process of creating the images and then also of making the prints. So he kind of told an entire story there and then presented them as a collection. And I think that was a lot more meaningful. Like, it's going to influence people, or it's going to be more compelling, I guess, when you present a whole series of simple images like that than if you just present the one. Because the one image of a Joshua tree in the fog, which it was a fog in the desert, which is really rare and really amazing, it's an amazing image. But if you've got an entire collection of, like, a portfolio of work around that idea, it's just a lot more impactful. Another project that Nick did was he went out to Route 66 in the American West and photographed old destroyed buildings like gas stations, hotels, that kind of thing. And again, like, one image is going to be cool and it's going to be evocative, but it's not going to tell the story of this sort of forgotten, abandoned past of much of the American West. And, like, for example, Route 66, if you've ever seen the Pixar movie Cars, they kind of tell this story a little bit through cartoons. But basically, like, after the interstate freeways were created, a lot of Route 66 was simply abandoned and just went to waste. And the buildings are still there telling this story. So Nick went to document that on large and medium format film, and he's done a great job. So again, one image, not as powerful, collection of work, much more powerful. And then he went further and documented all on YouTube and made some beautiful prints and showed that as well. So that's another very simple project, but very effective. Alan Brock, a friend of mine, he's also done a recent project release. He just released his project of the canyon that he and I spent 5 days exploring out in Utah last year. And he beat me to the punch. I have honestly I just been procrastinating / haven't had time for it. But I've got a bunch of work around that, my version of that project that's like almost ready to be released, but not quite. So he beat me to it. So check out his project. It's a portfolio box collection of his images from this remote canyon in Utah. And again, a single image wouldn't have told the story of that canyon or given you a sense of it anywhere near as well as a whole body of work that was carefully created, carefully curated to tell that story of that place and give you a sense of place and a sense of experience. And I really think that that's a powerful project. Brooks Jensen is another photographer who's done really effective project work. He, both himself and helping other photographers do that. So he has his own personal publication, Kokoro, which is a zine, it's a PDF zine idea where he releases projects, bodies of work that he's created around various ideas, and many of them very simple ideas. He just releases those online, and he's got a huge catalog of them. And again, the same idea behind my own zines, but basically that you want to create the work in such a way that it can be consumed in sequence with choreography, where you look at this image and then you turn the page and you look at this image and then you turn the page and you look at this image, and these two images are across from each other on a spread, and then they're accompanied by this text and this story and this description. And it tells us a narrative. It builds a picture very effectively, which is very useful and powerful. And then he liked the idea so much that he created a book project called Seeing in Sixes. But what makes it unusual is he opened it up to photographers from all over the world who could submit their own 6-image projects and around any idea they liked. He would go through and curate all those projects, pick a good collection of them, and then put them all in a bound hardcover book called Seeing in Sixes, of all these different photographers' 6-image series projects. And that's another really interesting idea where it's a collaboration between a whole bunch of photographers, each of them submitting a project. So I just really think projects are a powerful way to express ideas, explore locations and places and people, groups, and just anything we're trying to do with photography can often be done even more powerfully with projects. So I think if we would all just consider thinking about our work in projects, we can find it very motivating and very helpful to our photography. Lastly, a project that I've had ongoing for a long time is my Mojave Monochrome project. I do plan to continue and expand that too. But that project is exploring the diverse dune systems of the Mojave Desert, and just it blew my mind trying to go out and find every single one of the different dune systems, dune fields in the Mojave Desert. There's a lot of them. There's a lot more than I even realized, and some of them are very rugged, very remote, hard to get to, and seldom photographed. And that just became a really motivating project for me. It motivates so much stuff. It motivated me to explore different film stocks, different cameras, different formats. I've shot it on the Mamiya 6.7. I've shot it on the Intrepid 8x10 prototype. And basically, I'm planning to go back out in the future. And some of these dune fields are so remote and hard to get to. Like, I'm literally building an expedition vehicle for going out there and camping and getting to these places, because you need like a high clearance 4-wheel drive, and you need camping supplies, and you need to be able to operate off grid for days at a time to get to some of these places. And so it's just really exciting and motivational to have a project around which to focus your work. It can often inspire you to do trips, inspire you to check out new kinds of film, new development techniques, new printing techniques. For example, I've been experimenting with contact printing in the darkroom of my Mojave Monochrome large format images. And so this is just a project that's been really rewarding to work on, because it's just kind of evolved over time and become so much broader than my original scope ever intended. And that's just the fun of projects. You just let them take you wherever they will, like a road. See what's down there, and oftentimes you'll just be really surprised by what you find at the other side. And so thinking in projects, very useful for your photography, very inspirational. Be sure to check out some of those photographers I mentioned, and I know there are many others out there that I didn't have time to mention, but I think projects are just a really great way to create meaningful and rewarding photography, and they can be very helpful when you're kind of in a creative rut and you're trying to break through that and come up with new ideas for your photography. So that's all for today's episode. I'm Justin Lowry, and until next time, stay curious.